On Sunday, I saw Steve Jobs, and wow. Yikes. So Steve Jobs is obviously a movie about Steve Jobs, not to be confused with the Ashton Kutcher one, Jobs, which I still haven't seen yet. But in this version, we have Steve Jobs being played by Michael Fassbender. The film is structured around 3 different product launches, or behind the scenes of these product launches. The whole film takes place in 3 different days and during these hours when they're getting ready to announce the product launch. It's 3 different key products from Steve Jobs, but it's not really about the products. No, what this movie is really about is Steve Jobs, his character. The relationships he has with the people around him, the people that come to him during these product launches, and just how his ego can get in the way of building these friendships that he has with all these other people, and how it can divide him from everyone that's around him. If anything, this film is a complete character study. Rather than a biography or a drama, it's more of a character study of Steve Jobs. This is definitely not a movie for everyone. For one, this is a movie that's just all about people talking and relationships and the fracturing of relationships. But even so, it's a really intense movie. Not intense as in the sense of action-packed, but more in the sense of just all these arguments that are happening, just how crazy our main character is, and it's a lot like seeing a train wreck in action. Now, the acting is superb on all accounts. Everyone involved in this film is absolutely great. Kate Winslet, Jeff Daniels, Seth Rogen, and of course Michael Fassbender were all really amazing in this film. And so were other ones that I just didn't quite know the names of. The character of Steve Jobs is really interesting in this movie, and this could make you either love or hate the film. Ultimately, it's a movie all about him, and even though he is a really interesting character, sometimes he might push it a little too far for some people. I think one of the most important things to a character-driven piece is if you like the main character, then you might ultimately love the movie. If you don't like the character, then you're not gonna like the movie, most likely. And sometimes Steve Jobs can be too much of a dick, and you might not like the character and might not like the movie. Even though he was a jerk, he was very delusional, he was absolutely crazy. He pushed away all the people that are easily could have been his friends. Like I said, it's almost like seeing a train wreck in action because he's just breaking the ties of all the people that should be there for him. He thinks everyone is a competition and everyone's out to get him. And he really doesn't trust too many people. But that's what I found fascinating about the character, and I wanted to see how it happened and how it all played out, and I wanted to see maybe he could end up becoming a better person by the end of the movie. Which he kind of does. He's a really smart, manipulative guy, and it's very scary. If it wasn't for how Steve Jobs was depicted in this movie, and if it wasn't for Fassbender's acting, this movie would have blown. But because those things are so well, so fascinating, so interesting, I really enjoyed this film. I knew at the beginning of the film they were going to use older cameras, and then as the film progressed they're going to use more state-of-the-art cameras. I was worried going into it that it wouldn't be as noticeable, but it definitely is noticeable in the movie, and I really liked that effect. I felt that as technology was getting better in this movie, so too was the camera. Another thing I was worried about the film was I knew it took place during 3 moments in 3 different launches. And I knew the film was all going to revolve around that, and I was worried that there wouldn't be an overall story. Thankfully, there is an overall story, and it's the overall story about Steve Jobs and his relationships, how his ego and how he's such a dick towards the beginning of the movie, and how he slowly progresses into some better person and becomes more accepting of his family, mainly his daughter, who at the beginning of the film doesn't even believe it's his daughter, won't acknowledge it. And because the film only takes place during these 3 different product launches, all the characters have to eventually converge on these 3 different product launches on these different days, and they all have to come together, and it's a little hectic. Because some of these conversations probably didn't happen during these product launches, but happened at a different time in a different area. But because the film is so focused on these press conferences, obviously they all had to meet together to make the overall story. But nonetheless, it's done in a remarkable way, and it makes everything frantic and crazy and fun. Now, there are 3 different flashbacks in the movie, and it's kind of neat, but at the same time kind of jarring the way they do it. The way they do these flashbacks is they have it during the same time as a conversation is happening. Like Steve Jobs will be conversing with someone or arguing with someone. As they're doing that, they cut back and forth between the flashback of these other characters in a previous time. They jump back and forth between the flashback and the present, and it's like they're intermingled with each other. This could make the conversation a little hard to understand at times, but I think 2 of the 3 worked extremely well, while the middle one, it took a while to get to the point. Or maybe that was the 3rd one. One of them took a bit too long to get to the point of why these 2 make sense, why the flashback and the present are happening at the same time. I do find it interesting the way they did it, because it does make you feel like, okay, this is what Michael Fassbender or Steve Jobs is thinking of as he's having this conversation with the other character in the movie. And so it makes sense, but it does make it a little jarring and hectic if you're not ready. You have to really pay attention. Yeah, this is one of those movies that demands your attention. If you do not pay attention to the movie, you will get lost really quickly. There's a lot of fast talking. Also, a lot of the camera work in the movie does remind me of Danny Boyle's direction style. Like, most of his films have some sort of artistic, something colorful. Some of the camera work, it's hard to explain, but some of these scenes that you see in some of his movies are like, okay, this is Danny Boyle, I know this is his movie. And sometimes that can get a little overwhelming. Like 127 Hours, some of the things in that movie, some of the more artistic styles, some of the Danny Boyle type shots were a little distracting for me. Nevertheless, I do feel that 127 Hours is one of his best movies, but sometimes it got in the way of the story itself. In Steve Jobs, there's a perfect mesh between some of the things that Danny Boyle does, and he does hold back, especially compared to 127 Hours. Like I said, it's really hard to explain, but if you've seen any of Danny Boyle's work, you'll notice some of the same shots. You're like, okay, this is Danny Boyle's stuff. This is totally that director. And when I learned that the person who did the script was the same person that did The Social Network, I thought, wow, it totally shows. This is like the same subject matter almost. Nevertheless, I thought Steve Jobs was a fun, entertaining movie. It's not going to be for everyone, that's for sure. It was intense, and if you like Steve Jobs' character in this movie, you're going to like the movie, but if you hate him, you're probably not going to want to see this movie at all. So for me, I'm going to give Steve Jobs 4 stars. It's not quite 4.5 for me, but I can understand why people might think this is the best movie they've seen this year, because it is definitely up there. So have you seen Steve Jobs? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment. And as always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was just my opinion.